The mahogany-paneled office of Hartwell and Associates felt suffocating as December rain pelted the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Denver. Ezra Blackwood shifted uncomfortably in the leather chair, his calloused hands still bearing traces of motor oil from his morning shift at Rocky Mountain Auto, contrasting sharply with the polished surfaces around him. At 28, Ezra had grown accustomed to being the family disappointment. His faded jeans and worn flannel shirt stood out starkly against the sea of designer suits filling the room. His father, Vincent Blackwood, sat 3 seats away, deliberately avoiding eye contact while adjusting his $3,000 Armani tie. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," Attorney Margaret Hartwell began, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "We're here for the reading of Theodore Blackwood's last will and testament." Ezra's stomach churned. His grandfather's funeral had been just 3 days ago, a massive affair with Denver's elite paying their respects to the real estate mogul who'd built half the city's skyline. Throughout the service, Vincent had made sure to position Ezra in the back row, away from the important family members. "Before we begin," Mrs. Hartwell continued, her grey eyes scanning the room, "Mr. Theodore Blackwood specifically requested that I remind everyone present that this will was drafted with complete mental clarity, witnessed by 3 independent parties, and notarized just 6 weeks ago." Vincent's jaw tightened. His brother Marcus, a successful surgeon, leaned forward expectantly. Various cousins, aunts, and business partners filled the remaining chairs, all waiting to hear how Theodore's $50 million empire would be divided. Mrs. Hartwell opened the sealed document, her hands steady despite the magnitude of the moment. "I'll read the relevant portions directly. To my son Vincent, who gave me grandchildren but never understood my values, I leave the family home in Cherry Hills and $2 million in bonds." Vincent's face remained impassive, though a vein in his temple began to pulse. "To my son Marcus, who dedicated his life to healing others, I leave $5 million and my medical research foundation." Various smaller bequests followed. $100,000 here, $250,000 there. Vintage cars and jewelry distributed among relatives who'd made token efforts to visit the old man. Then came the words that would change everything. "The majority of my estate, including all shares of Blackwood Industries, Blackwood Development Corporation, and the associated real estate holdings, valued at approximately $43 million, goes to my grandson, Ezra James Blackwood." The silence was deafening. Then chaos erupted. "This is impossible." Vincent shot to his feet, his face turning crimson. "He's a mechanic, a college dropout who wastes his time fixing junk cars." Ezra felt the room spinning. His hands trembled as the weight of an inheritance he never expected, never wanted, settled on his shoulders like a physical burden. "There must be some mistake," Marcus interjected, his surgeon's composure cracking. "Dad was clearly not in his right mind." "The will is ironclad," Mrs. Hartwell interrupted firmly. "Mr. Blackwood underwent comprehensive psychological evaluation just 4 weeks ago. I have the documentation right here." Vincent's business partner, Richard Steinberg, stood up abruptly. "This is insane. Ezra couldn't run a lemonade stand, let alone a corporation." "He's right." Vincent's voice grew louder, more venomous. "You want to know who disappointed me the most in this family?" The room fell silent. Ezra felt every eye turning toward him, watching as his father's finger pointed directly at his chest like a weapon. "Him. That's the son who threw away every opportunity, every advantage I gave him. He's the disappointment of this family. He chose to be a failure when he could have been anything." The words hit Ezra like physical blows. 28 years of criticism, of being called inadequate, of having his dreams dismissed and his efforts mocked. It all crystallized in that moment of public humiliation. His Aunt Patricia gasped audibly. His cousin Jennifer looked away in embarrassment. But it was the satisfied smirk on his father's face that finally broke something inside Ezra. "I'm done," Ezra whispered, his voice barely audible in the stunned silence. Then louder, steadier, "I'm done with this." He rose from his chair, his legs surprisingly steady despite the earthquake happening inside his chest. Every person in that room, lawyers, family members, business associates, watched as the supposed disappointment found his voice. "Mrs. Hartwell," he said, his words clear and deliberate, "I need to speak with you privately about legal protection." Vincent's smirk faltered. "What are you talking about?" Ezra turned to face his father directly for the first time in years. "I'm talking about consequences, Dad. Something you've never had to face." The rain continued to pound against the windows as Ezra walked toward Mrs. Hartwell's private office, leaving behind a room full of shocked relatives and the father who'd just publicly destroyed the last bridge between them. As the door closed behind him, Ezra heard his grandfather's voice in his memory. "Sometimes, son, standing up for yourself is the most important thing you'll ever do." The inheritance was just the beginning. The real battle was about to start. Margaret Hartwell's private office felt like a sanctuary compared to the chaos they'd left behind. Through the thick mahogany door, muffled voices of arguing family members created a distant soundtrack of discord. Ezra slumped into the chair across from her desk, his hands still shaking from the confrontation. "That was 28 years of abuse in one sentence," he said quietly, staring at his oil-stained fingers. And he said it in front of everyone. Margaret poured 2 glasses of water from a crystal pitcher, her movements deliberate and calming. At 62, she'd handled countless family disputes, but something about this case had gotten under her skin. "Ezra, before we discuss your legal options, there's something your grandfather left specifically for you." She opened her desk drawer and retrieved a sealed envelope marked with Theodore's distinctive handwriting, "For Ezra, to be opened only after the will reading." Ezra's hands trembled as he broke the wax seal. Inside was a handwritten letter, 2 pages in his grandfather's careful script. "My dear Ezra, if you're reading this, then you've just witnessed your father's true nature in front of a room full of witnesses. I'm sorry you had to endure that, but it was necessary for what comes next. For years I watched Vincent systematically destroy your confidence. When you were 16 and wanted to study automotive engineering, he told everyone you lacked ambition. When you opened Rocky Mountain Auto at 25, he called it playing with toys. But I saw something different. I saw you rebuild Mrs. Chen's transmission for free when her husband was in the hospital. I saw you teach neighborhood kids about engines while their parents worked double shifts. I saw you create jobs for 3 young men who couldn't afford college. You built something real, something meaningful. Vincent built buildings to make money. You build dreams to change lives. The inheritance isn't a gift, Ezra. It's a responsibility. And the board meeting next Monday isn't going to be easy. Vincent will fight this with everything he has. But here's what he doesn't know. I've been documenting his behavior for 3 years. Every cruel comment, every sabotaged opportunity, every public humiliation. It's all recorded, witnessed, and legally admissible. The choice is yours, grandson. You can walk away from all of this, or you can fight for what's right. But know this, whatever you choose, I'm proud of the man you've become. With love and faith in your future, Grandfather Theodore P.S. Check the safe behind the painting. The combination is your mother's birthday." Ezra looked up to find Margaret watching him intently. "He recorded everything? 3 years' worth of audio recordings, witness statements, and documentation. Your grandfather was building a case, Ezra. He knew Vincent would contest the will." Margaret walked to a landscape painting on the wall, revealing a hidden safe. After entering the combination, 24, his mother's birthday, the door swung open to reveal boxes of files, recording devices, and legal documents. "Your father made a critical mistake today," she continued, pulling out a thick folder. "Public defamation in front of witnesses, including business associates who could testify to the damage to your reputation." Ezra opened the first file. Inside were transcripts of family dinners, business meetings, and social gatherings. Vincent's voice, cold and cutting. "Ezra will never amount to anything. He's an embarrassment to the Blackwood name." Another transcript, from a charity gala. "My son. He fixes cars. I try not to think about it." "Jesus," Ezra whispered. "He really said all this?" "And more. Your grandfather was thorough." Margaret sat down, her expression growing serious. "But Ezra, you need to understand what you're up against. Vincent isn't just angry, he's desperate. Blackwood Industries is leveraged heavily. He's been using company funds to maintain his lifestyle. If he doesn't get control of the inheritance, he's broke? Worse. He could be facing fraud charges. The company audit I ordered yesterday revealed some concerning discrepancies." Ezra's phone buzzed with a text from his sister Sophia. "Dad's losing it. He just fired his secretary for looking at him wrong." "What's happening?" "There's something else," Margaret continued. "Your father called a press conference for tomorrow morning. He's planning to publicly challenge your mental fitness to inherit." "My mental fitness?" "It's a desperate move, but it could work if we don't respond properly. He's going to paint you as unstable, manipulative, someone who took advantage of an elderly man." Ezra stood and walked to the window. Outside, Denver's skyline stretched toward the mountains, buildings his grandfather had helped create. a legacy Vincent was willing to destroy to maintain control. What do you recommend? Margaret opened her laptop and pulled up a legal document. We file a countersuit, defamation, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and, given what we found in the company audit, potentially fraud. We turn his attack into our advantage. And if I lose, then you walk away with nothing, and Vincent destroys what your grandfather built. She paused, studying his face. But if you win, you don't just get the inheritance. You get justice for every cruel word, every sabotaged opportunity, every moment he made you feel worthless. Ezra picked up one of the recordings, Vincent's voice still echoing in his memory. He's the disappointment of this family. How long do I have to decide? His press conference is at 9 a.m. tomorrow. If we're going to fight this, I need your answer by tonight. Ezra looked at his grandfather's letter again, focusing on one line. The choice is yours, grandson. You can walk away from all of this, or you can fight for what's right. For the first time in his adult life, Ezra Blackwood felt something he hadn't experienced in years, the power to choose his own destiny. I need to make a phone call, he said quietly, and then we're going to war. That evening, Ezra sat in his small apartment above Rocky Mountain Auto, staring at the legal documents Margaret had prepared. The space was modest but clean, a far cry from his father's mansion in Cherry Hills Village. His phone had been buzzing non-stop since news of the inheritance leaked to local media. A knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. He opened it to find his younger sister Sophia, her usually perfect hair disheveled and her eyes red from crying. "Dad's completely lost it," she said, pushing past him into the apartment. "He spent 3 hours screaming at Mom about ungrateful children and family loyalty. Then he called Uncle Marcus and demanded he contest the will too." Ezra poured coffee for both of them. "What did Marcus say?" "That's the thing, he refused. He said Grandpa was sharp as a tack until the end, and if he chose you, there must be a good reason." Sophia sat on his worn couch. "Ezra, there's something else. I overheard Dad on the phone with his accountant, something about missing funds and covering tracks before the audit." Before Ezra could respond, his phone rang. Margaret's voice was tense. "Ezra, we have a problem. Your father moved up his press conference to tonight, 7 p.m. He's going live on Channel 7. What's he planning to say?" "According to my sources, he's claiming you manipulated your grandfather through his grief over your mother's death. He's also suggesting you have substance abuse issues." Ezra's jaw tightened. His mother had died in a car accident 5 years ago, a loss that had shattered the family. Using her memory as a weapon was a new low, even for Vincent. "That's not all," Margaret continued. "I just received the preliminary audit results. Ezra, your father has embezzled over $2.8 million from company accounts over the past 3 years. Sophia gasped, having heard every word. "Oh my God, Dad's been stealing?" "It gets worse," Margaret said. "He's been paying himself unauthorized bonuses, using company funds for personal expenses, and hiding losses from major investors. If Theodore hadn't changed the will when he did, Vincent would have bankrupted the entire company." Ezra felt pieces clicking into place. "That's why Grandpa left everything to me. He knew. Theodore discovered the embezzlement 6 months ago. That's when he started recording everything and building the case. He was protecting his life's work." At exactly 7 p.m., Ezra and Sophia watched Vincent's press conference from the apartment. Her father stood behind a podium at the Colorado Convention Center, flanked by his high-powered attorney, Harrison Pierce. "My father, Theodore Blackwood, was a great man," Vincent began, his voice steady but his eyes cold. "But in his final months, grief over my late wife's passing made him vulnerable to manipulation." The camera zoomed in as Vincent's performance grew more dramatic. "My son Ezra has struggled with depression and substance abuse since his mother's death. He isolated my father from family, filled his head with lies about me, and convinced him to change a will that had been stable for 15 years. Sophia grabbed Ezra's arm. "He's actually doing this. He's lying on television." But Vincent wasn't finished. "Ezra dropped out of college, abandoned his responsibilities, and has never shown any interest in legitimate business. The idea that he could run a multi-million-dollar corporation is not just absurd, it's dangerous to every employee and investor who depends on Blackwood Industries." The reporter asked, "Mr. Blackwood, what evidence do you have of these allegations?" "I have witnesses who will testify to my son's erratic behavior, his inability to maintain relationships, and his complete lack of business acumen. Tomorrow I'm filing for emergency injunction to prevent him from taking control of assets he's unfit to manage." As the press conference ended, Ezra's phone exploded with calls. Reporters, family members, even customers from his garage wanting to know if the allegations were true. Then his phone rang with an unexpected number. "Ezra, this is Janet Morrison from Channel 9 News. I covered your grandfather's charitable work for years. I know the kind of man he was, and I know the kind of man you are. Would you like to tell your side of the story?" Ezra looked at Sophia, who nodded encouragingly. "Yes, but not just my side. I want to tell the truth." An hour later, Janet Morrison arrived with a camera crew. As they set up in his modest living room, Ezra felt surprisingly calm. For years, he'd let his father control the narrative. Tonight, that ended. "Mr. Blackwood," Janet began when the camera rolled, "your father has made serious allegations about your fitness to inherit. How do you respond?" Ezra looked directly into the camera. "My father is a desperate man who's been caught stealing from his own company. Rather than take responsibility, he's trying to destroy me the same way he's been doing for 28 years. He pulled out the audit documents Margaret had provided. These financial records show that Vincent Blackwood embezzled $2.8 million from Blackwood Industries. My grandfather discovered this theft, which is why he changed his will." Janet's eyes widened. "You're alleging your father committed fraud?" "I'm not alleging anything. These are facts. Facts that will be presented in court when we file charges tomorrow morning." The interview continued for 30 minutes. Ezra spoke about his garage, his customers, his efforts to help the community. He talked about his grandfather's true character and their relationship. Most importantly, he played excerpts from Theodore's recordings, Vincent's own voice revealing his cruelty and contempt. As the news crew packed up, Janet shook Ezra's hand. "Your father made a mistake going public. The court of public opinion doesn't always side with the rich and powerful." After they left, Sophia hugged her brother. "I'm proud of you. Mom would be proud of you." Ezra's phone rang one more time. Margaret's voice was triumphant. "Ezra, you need to see the news." Vincent's press conference backfired completely. 3 major clients just called to withdraw from Blackwood Industries, citing concerns about leadership, and Channel 9's interview with you is trending on social media. What happens now? Now we file our countersuit first thing in the morning. Defamation, fraud, embezzlement, the works. Your father wanted a public fight. He's about to get one. As Denver settled into night, Ezra stood at his window looking out at the city his grandfather had helped build. Tomorrow would bring the fight of his life. But for the first time since that devastating moment in the lawyer's office, he felt ready. Vincent Blackwood had underestimated his son. It would be the last mistake he'd ever make. Next morning, Margaret's law office had transformed into a war room. Boxes of documents covered every surface, and 3 junior associates worked frantically to organize evidence. Ezra arrived at 8 a.m. to find the place buzzing with activity. "Good morning," Margaret said without looking up from her laptop. "Your father's attorney filed an emergency motion at 6 a.m., trying to freeze all assets until the case is resolved. Can he do that?" "He can try, but Judge Patricia Hernandez is overseeing this case, and she doesn't tolerate frivolous motions." Margaret finally looked up, her expression grim but determined. "However, we have bigger developments." She led Ezra to a conference room where a middle-aged woman in a business suit sat nervously clutching a manila folder. "Ezra, meet Linda Patterson. She was your father's personal assistant for 12 years until yesterday." Linda looked up with tired eyes. "He fired me after the press conference, said I knew too much and couldn't be trusted." She opened her folder, revealing bank statements and receipts. "But I kept copies of everything, every fake expense report, every unauthorized transfer, every lie he told investors." Ezra sat down across from her. "Why are you helping me?" "Because your grandfather was a good man who treated employees like family, and because I have a daughter your age who your father tried to—" She paused, collecting herself. "Let's just say Vincent Blackwood is not the man he pretends to be in public." Margaret spread Linda's documents across the table. "This is bigger than we thought. The embezzlement goes back 5 years, not 3. We're looking at over $4.2 million in stolen funds." "There's more," Linda continued. "He's been cooking the books to hide losses from the Riverside Development Project. $3 million down the drain because he refused to listen to the engineering reports about soil instability." Ezra studied the papers, his anger building. "He bankrupted Grandpa's company and then tried to blame me for being unfit to run it." A knock at the door interrupted them. Margaret's secretary entered with a visibly agitated man in his 60s. "This is Robert Chen," she announced. He insisted on seeing you immediately. Ezra recognized the name. Mrs. Chen's husband. From the transmission repair? Robert nodded urgently. My wife. She watched the news last night. She cried for 2 hours. She say we have to help you. He pulled out a weathered notebook. Your grandfather, he come to our restaurant every week for 3 years. He always talk about you. He write things down. Ask me to remember. He opened the notebook, revealing Theodore's handwriting alongside Robert's broken English translations. He say Vincent try to stop bank from giving you loan for garage. He say Vincent tell people you are, how you say, not reliable. Margaret leaned forward. Are you saying Vincent actively sabotaged Ezra's business? Yes. He call other shops, tell them not to sell parts to Ezra. He tell customers bad things. Your grandfather, he very angry about this. Linda gasped. That explains the phone calls. Vincent had me compile lists of your customers, your suppliers. He said it was for competitive analysis. Ezra felt the room spinning. He was systematically trying to destroy my business? Gets worse, Robert continued. He tell people at Country Club that you have problems with drinking, gambling, all lies. Your grandfather, he record these conversations on his phone. Margaret was already reaching for her laptop. Linda, do you still have access to Vincent's email accounts? I have everything saved on this drive, Linda said, pulling out a USB stick. Emails, voicemails, text messages. 12 years of evidence that Vincent Blackwood is not the man he claims to be. As they plugged in the drive, Ezra's phone rang. It was Sophia, her voice panicked. Ezra, you need to get to the hospital. Dad collapsed at home this morning. They think it's a heart attack. The room fell silent. Margaret looked at Ezra expectantly. What do you want to do? Ezra stared out the window at downtown Denver, thinking about the man who had spent decades trying to destroy him now lying in a hospital bed. Part of him felt vindicated, but a larger part just felt sad. We continue, he said quietly. Dad made his choice when he decided to steal from the company and lie about me publicly. His health problems don't change what he did. Margaret nodded approvingly. The hearing is in 2 hours. Judge Hernandez will review the evidence and decide whether to grant the emergency motion. Linda stood up, her nervousness replaced by determination. I want to testify. 12 years of watching him hurt people, destroy lives, steal money. It ends today. Robert Chen placed a weathered hand on Ezra's shoulder. Your grandfather, he say you have good heart. He say someday you make things right. Today is that day. As they prepared for court, more evidence kept flooding in. Former employees calling with stories of Vincent's abuse. Vendors who had been pressured to drop Ezra's garage. Even some of Vincent's country club friends expressing shock at the recordings. Margaret's phone buzzed with a text from the courthouse. Judge Hernandez reviewed the preliminary evidence. She's denying Vincent's emergency motion and scheduling a full hearing for next week. She looked up with the first genuine smile Ezra had seen from her. She also issued a warrant for Vincent's arrest on fraud charges. Even though he's in the hospital, justice doesn't take sick days, Ezra. Neither do the consequences of 30 years of bad choices. As they gathered their materials for the courthouse, Ezra felt something he hadn't experienced in decades. The weight of all those years of humiliation and sabotage lifting from his shoulders. His father had built his empire on lies, theft, and cruelty. Today, that empire would begin to crumble. 1 week later, the Denver County Courthouse buzzed with unprecedented activity. Media trucks lined Bannock Street as reporters from across Colorado gathered for what local news had dubbed the trial of the decade. Inside courtroom 4A, every seat was filled with family members, business associates, and curious onlookers, eager to witness the Blackwood family's public destruction. Ezra sat at the defendant's table wearing his grandfather's navy suit, the only formal wear he owned. His hands were steady now, the nervous trembling of a week ago replaced by quiet determination. Beside him, Margaret shuffled through 3 boxes of evidence they'd accumulated. Vincent looks terrible, she whispered, nodding toward the plaintiff's table. Indeed, Vincent Blackwood appeared to have aged a decade in 7 days. His heart attack had been mild, but the stress of impending criminal charges and public humiliation had taken its toll. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, his expensive suit hung loose on his frame, and his eyes darted nervously around the packed courtroom. His attorney, Harrison Pierce, looked equally uncomfortable. Word had leaked that 3 of Vincent's other lawyers had dropped him once they discovered the extent of the evidence against their client. Judge Patricia Hernandez entered the courtroom, her black robes billowing as she took the bench. At 58, she had a reputation for no-nonsense justice and intolerance for courtroom theatrics. "This is a civil case," she announced, her voice carrying easily through the silent room. "Vincent Blackwood versus Ezra Blackwood, contesting the validity of Theodore Blackwood's last will and testament. Additionally, we have counterclaims of defamation, fraud, and intentional infliction of emotional distress." Pierce stood for his opening statement, his usual swagger noticeably absent. "Your Honor, this case is about an elderly man manipulated by a troubled son who exploited grief and isolation to steal an inheritance rightfully belonging to the family patriarch." His argument felt hollow, rehearsed. The evidence that had leaked to media over the past week had already damaged Vincent's credibility beyond repair. When Margaret rose for her opening statement, the courtroom fell completely silent. "Your Honor, this case is about something much more fundamental than money or inheritance. It's about a systematic campaign of abuse, sabotage, and theft that lasted 30 years. She walked toward the jury box, making eye contact with each member. Vincent Blackwood didn't just steal money from his father's company. He stole his son's dignity, his opportunities, and his sense of self-worth. She gestured toward the evidence table. "We have audio recordings, financial documents, and witness testimony that will show you a pattern of behavior so cruel, so calculated, that Theodore Blackwood felt compelled to protect both his grandson and his life's work from further destruction." The first witness was Linda Patterson. Vincent's former assistant walked to the witness stand with quiet confidence, her 12 years of suppressed anger finally finding an outlet. "Tell the court about Mr. Vincent Blackwood's treatment of his son," Margaret instructed. Linda's voice was steady and clear. "He actively sabotaged Ezra's business by calling suppliers and threatening to pull Blackwood Industries contracts if they continued serving Rocky Mountain Auto. He spread false rumors about Ezra's character at social functions. He once told me to compile a list of Ezra's customers so he could contact them personally to warn them about doing business with his son." Pierce objected repeatedly, but Judge Hernandez overruled him each time. The evidence was overwhelming. "Did you witness Mr. Vincent Blackwood embezzling funds from the company?" "Yes. He had me process fake expense reports, unauthorized bonuses, and personal purchases charged to corporate accounts. When I questioned these transactions, he told me it was family money and threatened my job if I said anything." When Pierce cross-examined Linda, his questions came across as desperate attempts to discredit a woman whose only crime was loyalty to her employer. The second witness was Robert Chen, who testified about Theodore's weekly visits to the family restaurant and his pride in Ezra's character. "Mr. Theodore, he always say Ezra have good heart. He say Vincent try to destroy his son because Ezra remind him of his own failures." By lunch break, Vincent looked physically ill. His wife, Patricia, had left the courtroom in tears after Linda's testimony about the embezzlement. Several family members who had initially supported Vincent were now sitting on Ezra's side of the room. The afternoon session brought the most damaging evidence. Theodore's audio recordings played through the courtroom's sound system. Vincent's voice filled the space, each cruel word echoing off the walls like accusations from beyond the grave. "Ezra will never amount to anything. He's weak, pathetic, a waste of the Blackwood name. I should have had another son, one with ambition instead of this disappointment. He's an embarrassment. I try not to acknowledge him in public." As the recordings played, Ezra watched his father's face crumble. For the first time in his life, Vincent was hearing his own words played back without the filter of justification or denial. Several jury members looked visibly disturbed by the casual cruelty in his voice. When Margaret called Ezra to testify on his own behalf, the courtroom was electric with anticipation. He walked to the witness stand with steady steps, his voice clear as he was sworn in. "Mr. Blackwood," Margaret began gently, "tell the court about your relationship with your father." Ezra looked directly at the jury, then at Vincent. "My father spent my entire life trying to convince me I was worthless. When I was 16 and wanted to study automotive engineering, he told everyone I lacked ambition. When I opened my garage, he called it playing with toys. He sabotaged my business relationships, damaged my reputation, and made sure I knew every day that I was a disappointment. How did this affect you?" For years I believed him. I thought maybe he was right. Maybe I really was a failure. It wasn't until my grandfather started showing interest in my work, visiting my garage, meeting my customers, that I realized I had built something meaningful. Ezra's testimony continued for an hour, detailing years of psychological abuse and sabotage. When Pierce tried to suggest that Ezra was exaggerating or lying, Margaret introduced phone records showing Vincent's calls to Ezra's suppliers, email threads discussing his problem son, and witness statements from dozens of people who had heard Vincent's cruel comments over the years. The final blow came when Margaret played Theodore's last recording, made just 2 weeks before his death. "I'm changing my will because I finally understand what Vincent has been doing to Ezra. My son isn't just cruel, he's dangerous. He will destroy everything I built if given the chance. Ezra represents everything good about the Blackwood name. He's the only one I trust to preserve my legacy." When court adjourned for the day, Vincent sat alone at his table while his few remaining supporters filed out. Ezra noticed his father's hands shaking as he gathered his papers. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed Ezra for comments. But he walked past them silently, saving his words for tomorrow's closing arguments. The battle was almost over. Justice, it seemed, was finally within reach. 3 days later, courtroom 4A was even more packed than before. Word had spread throughout Denver that closing arguments would be delivered today, with a verdict expected by evening. Ezra arrived early, finding an unusual sense of calm settling over him as he watched the familiar faces file in. Sophia sat in the front row behind him, offering a supportive smile. Linda Patterson had returned, along with Robert Chen and his wife. Even some of his garage customers had taken time off work to show their support. On the other side of the courtroom, Vincent sat with only his lawyer and a handful of distant relatives, who seemed more curious than supportive. Margaret stood for her closing argument, her voice carrying the weight of weeks of preparation. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this case began with a simple question. Why did Theodore Blackwood leave his fortune to his grandson instead of his son? The answer is now crystal clear. He left it to the person who embodied his values: compassion, integrity, and genuine care for others." She gestured toward the evidence table. Vincent Blackwood stole $4.2 million from his father's company. He systematically sabotaged his son's business. He spread lies about Ezra's character for decades. And when confronted with the consequences of his actions, he chose to attack his son publicly, rather than accept responsibility. Margaret's voice grew stronger. Theodore Blackwood spent his final years watching his son Vincent destroy everything he had built. Not just the company, but family relationships, employee trust, and basic human decency. He made the only choice a responsible father could make. He protected his legacy by giving it to someone worthy of preserving it. When Harrison Pierce delivered Vincent's closing argument, his words felt desperate and hollow. "My client made mistakes," he admitted, "but we're talking about a family business built over decades. Surely reconciliation is possible without destroying a man's entire life." But the jury had heard too much evidence, seen too many documents, listened to too many cruel recordings. Pierce's plea for mercy felt like too little, too late. Judge Hernandez sent the jury to deliberate at 2 p.m. Legal experts predicted a long deliberation given the complexity of the financial evidence, but Ezra suspected the decision had already been made in the jurors' minds. He was right. At 4:17 p.m., the jury filed back into the courtroom. The foreman, a middle-aged construction worker named David Martinez, held the verdict with steady hands. "Have you reached a verdict?" Judge Hernandez asked. "We have, Your Honor. In the matter of Vincent Blackwood versus Ezra Blackwood, contesting the validity of Theodore Blackwood's will, how do you find?" "We find the will to be valid and binding. Theodore Blackwood was of sound mind when he made these decisions." The courtroom erupted in whispers, but Martinez wasn't finished. "Furthermore, regarding the counterclaims, we find Vincent Blackwood liable for defamation, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and fraud. We award Ezra Blackwood $3, $2 million in compensatory damages, and $1.5 million in punitive damages." Vincent's face went completely white. The total judgment of $4.7 million, combined with the criminal charges for embezzlement, would bankrupt him completely. Judge Hernandez banged her gavel for silence. "Mr. Vincent Blackwood, you are hereby ordered to pay the judgment within 60 days. Additionally, I'm forwarding the evidence of embezzlement to the District Attorney's Office for criminal prosecution." As the courtroom slowly emptied, Ezra felt an unexpected wave of sadness rather than triumph. Vincent sat alone at his table, staring at nothing. His empire of cruelty finally collapsed around him. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed with questions about Ezra's plans for the inheritance, but he had prepared for this moment. "Theodore Blackwood built his fortune by creating homes and opportunities for Denver families," he announced to the cameras. "I intend to honor that legacy. Blackwood Industries will continue operating, but with a new mission: affordable housing for working families and small business development in underserved communities. A reporter pushed forward. "What about your father? Will you help him financially?" Ezra paused, thinking of the broken man he'd left in that courtroom. "My father made his choices over 30 years. He chose cruelty over kindness, greed over generosity, pride over family. The consequences of those choices aren't my responsibility to fix." But privately, Ezra had already made a different decision. 6 months later, Rocky Mountain Auto had expanded into a full community center. The sign out front read, "Blackwood Community Garage, where everyone belongs." Inside, young people learned automotive skills while earning scholarships for trade school. Single parents got their cars repaired at cost. Veterans found steady employment and purpose. Ezra kept the garage's original bay for his own work, finding peace in the simple act of fixing things that were broken. One rainy Thursday afternoon, he was replacing a transmission when he heard footsteps in the garage doorway. He looked up to see a familiar figure, thinner, older, wearing clothes that had seen better days. Vincent Blackwood stood in the entrance, holding a crumpled newspaper clipping about the community center. "Hello, son," he said quietly. Ezra wiped his hands on a shop towel, studying his father's face. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something that might have been humility. "Dad." They stood in awkward silence for a moment. Finally, Vincent spoke. "I read about what you're doing here. It's good work." Ezra nodded. "Grandpa would have liked it." "Yes, he would have." Vincent's voice cracked slightly. "I came to apologize for everything, for the things I said, the things I did, the son I failed to be to you." "It's a little late for apologies. I know it doesn't change anything, but I needed you to hear it." Vincent pulled out a worn photograph, Ezra as a child, grinning while helping Theodore in his workshop. "I found this in Dad's things. He kept it on his desk for 20 years. Ezra took the photo, memories flooding back of afternoons spent learning from his grandfather while his father worked late at the office. "I was so afraid of not living up to his legacy that I destroyed everything he actually valued," Vincent continued, "including my relationship with you." "What do you want from me, Dad?" Vincent's shoulders sagged. "Nothing. I don't deserve anything. I just wanted you to know that I see who you've become and I'm proud of you, even if I have no right to be." He turned to leave, then stopped. "There's a job opening at Henderson Construction. Manual labor, but it's honest work. I start Monday." As Vincent walked away into the Denver drizzle, Ezra felt something he hadn't experienced in decades: pity for his father. Not forgiveness. That would take time if it ever came at all. But understanding that Vincent Blackwood was ultimately just a broken man who had broken others in his desperation to appear strong. Ezra turned back to his work, the sound of honest labor filling the garage. Outside, Denver continued its daily rhythm. People going to work, raising families, building lives brick by brick. Theodore Blackwood's legacy lived on, not in the buildings that bore his name, but in the community his grandson was building, one repaired car, one helped family, one second chance at a time. The inheritance had never really been about money. It had been about choosing what kind of man Ezra wanted to become. In the end, he had chosen to be exactly the person his grandfather had always believed he could be, and that, perhaps, was the greatest victory of all.